Hello, everyone. Welcome to the web seminar, How CDNs Can Improve Mobile Application Performance, produced by IT Pro Today and sponsored by Cloudflare. Please note that this web seminar will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You will receive an email when the session is available for review. Also, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please feel free to type them into the question box on your webcast consoles. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. James Martin is an award-winning technology journalist who has covered cloud software and many other aspects of computing for media outlets such as IT Pro Today, CIO, PC World, and others. Derek Yee is a product marketing lead for performance services at Cloudflare, where he leads the team supporting the performance services portfolio. Derek has been largely focused on the enterprise business segment, helping them solve their challenges for application delivery in a cloud-first world. Prior to Cloudflare, he spent 10-plus years at Citrix supporting sales, marketing, education, and enablement for their flagship network product, NetScaler. Wesley Shih is a systems engineer on the Cloudflare mobile performance team. Wesley has developed enterprise apps and SDKs for the past 5-plus years on Android, iOS, and other hybrid platforms, for example, Cordova. Prior to Cloudflare, Wesley was a mobile lead at Numob, where he focused on solutions for reducing app errors, speeding up performance, and boosting conversions. We want to thank you all for attending. We're looking to a great event. And with that, I'll turn things over to James Martin.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone taking time out to be here. So let's just dive right in. What I want to talk about, or what I want to do, is share some data points that will show what causes poor app performance and how that can affect your ratings and your conversion. So one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is speed. Consumers, as we all know, are impatient. Maybe we've been impatient ourselves. I am certainly guilty of that. Consumers are loyal if you're fast, and you're going to lose money if you're slow. There are other mobile app success roadblocks to take into account. Unstable performance, APIs that cause high latency, slow response times, images that time out, that don't load, and low user ratings and poor reviews. So I'm going to talk about all of these in a little bit more detail, along with giving you some data. So, why you need speed? In the immortal words of Google, speed thrills, friction kills. Really catchy. I like that. Why you need speed is consumers are impatient, as I mentioned. 47% expect a web page to load in 2 seconds or less. It's not a lot of time. That source is from, that's Gomez is the source of that information. Consumers are impatient, as we're saying. 40% of consumers will abandon a website that takes more than 3 seconds to load. So the bottom line here is you got 2 or 3 seconds to engage most consumers. 29% smartphone users will leave a mobile website or an app if it's too slow or they can't find the information that they're looking for. That's from Google. Of those smartphone users who bail, 70% do so because of slow load times. So that's a huge majority of people. So let's talk about loyalty. Consumers are loyal if you're fast. 52% of online shoppers say that fast page loading is important to their site loyalty. If it's too slow, they're just not going to come back. 3 seconds of waiting can decrease customer satisfaction by 16%. So again, we're talking 2 to 3 seconds. If you're not delivering in that short time frame, you're going to lose a portion of your audience. And then 40% of consumers won't wait more than 3 seconds before abandoning a retail site. So let's talk about money, because that's really important. For an e-commerce site that's making $100,000 daily, a 1-second page delay could cost $2.5 million in lost sales annually. It's a huge amount of money. So let's talk about some other roadblocks to the success of a mobile app. Unstable performance. Slow or unstable app performance can result in low ratings. In this box to the right, you can see some people complaining about the performance of the app and giving it 2 stars or 1 star. Here's a good example, but let's talk about images at this point. Images time out and don't load. And you can see this reviewer saying, images don't appear in the shopping bag, very slow loading, one item in my bag won't stop saying it's loading. You know, it's a disastrous user experience. And it can cause shopping cart abandonment. And it results in a poor review. This is a great example of that. So APIs that result in high latency, slow response time, many apps today leverage more than one API to connect with other services and apps. High latency is the time it takes for a request to travel to or from the API or web server. Slow response time is the time spent processing requests. You want apps with high latency and slow response time are going to equal a poor user experience. A poor user experience is going to result in low user reviews and ratings, and those low reviews and ratings can cause low app adoption. So low user ratings and poor reviews, 67% of the top 100 free iOS apps have 4 stars or more. 92% have a 3+ star rating. So obviously the bulk of the free apps for the iPhone have 3 or 4 stars or more. On the other side, only 13% of users will consider an app with a 1-star rating. 59% of users always or usually check the ratings before downloading an app. So again, if your app has a low rating due to the performance or other things, it's not going to work out very well for you in terms of conversion. Improving the user rating can increase adoption and conversion. Going from 2 to 3 stars boosts conversion by 280%, and going from 2 to 4 stars can increase conversion 540%. That's from Adweek. And 73% of mobile device owners say an app or a website's performance is key to their impression of a brand. So if you're delivering a great user experience, it's going to reflect with a glow on your brand, and then the opposite is true as well. If your app is buggy, it's slow, it crashes, images don't load, it's not going to reflect well on your on your brand. Okay, and that's my part of the show, and I'm going to hand it over to Derek.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. So I'll give a second, and hopefully I think our screen should be live with the changeover. Someone could maybe quickly confirm that for us. Great. Hey, so thanks for the intro and so the context on what we see within the mobile space. To sort of bring it back into the subject for today's webinar is we look at the role of CDNs, content delivery networks, and where they can help improving with mobile experiences for a consumer that's rapidly becoming more rating sensitive. They're becoming more globally dispersed, and the types of applications, as Jim had alluded to, are also becoming increasingly complex with APIs, and it's not just straight on HTML right now that needs to be delivered to an end user device. So who is Cloudflare? And maybe many of you are already familiar with who Cloudflare is, but to sum it up, we're helping build a better internet. That's really been our mission statement from day one. and how we position and what we do to the market. Cloudflare likes to describe themselves as an edge service provider. So when we describe the term edge, we're talking about anything beyond the boundaries of what a traditional data center or cloud data center would entail, that extends beyond into the network that lives in a place like Cloudflare, out to a user device, or even it could be an IoT device or a smartphone or tablet. So I mean, really, it's that when you look at who Cloudflare is, again, we position ourselves really as sort of an edge service provider. And what we want to talk to you guys today is what we see CDNs and how they're constructed, and the notion of what a CDN is and how it's positioned to improve mobile application experience. And the one area where we've been able to really sort of spend some time looking at this more closely involves an acquisition that Cloudflare made last November. And today I'm joined by Wesley Sheep, who used to be an engineer with the NewMob team. So back in November, Cloudflare acquired a company called NewMob, and their core focus was around really accelerating mobile application performance, specifically for what we like to call the last mobile mile, which is essentially once you leave the boundaries of the internet, hit that base tower from your mobile carrier to the user's device, there's a big bad world that happens in that last mile that traditional CDNs really fell short on how they were able to sort of navigate that. So when we look at what really causes slow mobile applications and sites, and Jen gave you some of the high-level stats. We talk to sort of there's three things or three key areas. Number one, mobile hardware is a limiting factor. So if the device doesn't have enough memory, RAM, it's going to impact how it can deliver the actual application or content. Secondly, mobile devices that traverse mobile carrier networks, that's another sort of link in the chain that needs to be resolved, and how we can sort of optimize delivery over, say, 2G, 3G networks, which are still mainstream in some emerging markets. And then lastly, we talk about, with applications that have more complex API calls, the more that they need to be able to translate data from alternate sources, including back to the server origin, again, more calls, network calls, is going to actually impact how the application will actually end up performing. So what can a CDN do for mobile? When we take a quick level set on what are the value of CDNs and why CDNs work so well today for internet delivery, is the fact that number one, we can cache data globally. For any business that's looking to expand their presence, they've got users that might be in Japan or Asia, and these are multinational companies, and you've got customers that can be anywhere across the world. The last thing you want to be able to do is to have your users connecting and there's a slow experience because they're having to do a transatlantic or trans-Pacific connection to a data center that's back at the corporate home. We look at how content is delivered on a CDN. CDNs have to be able to deliver large files very quickly, so they enable a number of optimization techniques that can compress files, that can ensure that these package files can actually get there a lot faster. And last but not least, we talk about increased availability. High availability and uptime is probably one of the largest benefits that you get from looking at a CDN, in that so much content becomes cached at the edge across the points of presence with the CDN, in that if anything should go down at the main data center or the origin, you can still serve cached content from the edge, so you still have some uptime and availability for users. So to preface sort of our discussion today, I think what's interesting, we pulled this there was a test done by the folks over at Web Performance today, where they pulled up an O'Reilly site and they wanted to see, okay, so we're running this through O'Reilly site through a CDN, what are the benefits that we get in performance improvement? And it was actually tested on a desktop client versus a mobile device. And they actually found the performance benefits that they got as far as improvements was actually lower on a mobile device than what they experience with a desktop client. So this really sort of sets the stage for how we look at where CDNs play in their sweet spot, was essentially from a website. You've got a user requesting content on a website, going through the CDN where they can navigate lease lines across the internet, delivering to someone that's connecting on sort of a web-enabled connection or internet-enabled connection. Whereas when you look at the last mobile mile, this is the area where we look at NewMob was playing. NewMob is able to do some very special things to how data is actually transmitted back and forth once it leaves the edge or the boundaries of the CDN provider to the actual user across that 3G or 4G network. And this is where I'd like to, we'll start, I want to kind of bring Wesley into the discussion, since I've been sort of setting the stage for what we're going to be looking at today. And Wesley's probably spent a lot more time studying this space than any of us on this call today has. And I wanted him to sort of share some of the experiences that had led NewMod to get to where they were, and specifically looking at this problem and addressing sort of the challenges of the last mobile mile. So I know there are some things here, Wesley, that we had talked about previously.
Yeah.
You want to kind of share some?
Yeah, sure. So when you're connecting from a mobile device to the edge server and you're going across to the satellite tower, like there are a lot of things that aren't as efficient over that connection. You have a much higher packet loss rate. You're retransmitting data, and now you have to worry about congestion. Like, what if you have a lot of people in this area all like sending packets? So in that way, like there are a lot of these problems that don't really get solved by traditional on-the-device software that comes prepackaged.
Got it. Okay. And I think part of the thing is when we look at what happens here, from an app developer standpoint, there's things that you can do within the app to ensure local performance of the app on the device. But where we're looking at here is once you leave the boundaries of code that you can put in place for an application, once you hit the wire on that network into sort of this unknown, TCP is sort of the de facto or the default mechanism that data gets translated across the network. TCP across mobile networks can be problematic. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, TCP across, you don't really have a lot of control. TCP will do things like if it finds that one packet is dropped, it automatically halves the rate that you send data. And TCP was built in the 1980s, and it's not really tuned for network conditions. Like if you're in a poor network area in India versus a fast 4G connection in San Francisco, the parameters of like how many packets you can send at once, like how you can control your algorithm, are vastly different.
Yeah. And I think one of the other stats that we look at is, so we talk about, you talk about packet loss and error rates is also a factor when you look at sort of different types of networks. And obviously, I think, so this is a snapshot when we look at sort of the percentage of error rates that you get. Of course, you get probably the lowest on 4G and LTE, but as you go into various generations, early generations like 2G and 3G, we can see that it is higher. And I think to the earlier discussion, we talked about what the user experience is going to be like. Speed is one factor. The overall experience can also get affected by if an application is either crashing or if it's not working as advertised. That again can lead to sort of a poor experience. I mean, think about like if you're playing with Google Maps and you're in an area with spotty connection and like you're coming out of a parking garage and you're waiting. I mean, things you take for granted that is an optimal experience. It only takes one instance where it's less reliable that would force someone to start looking for alternate options.
Imagine if you're shopping and you have a cart, you may or may not check out if that call repeatedly fails. Yeah,
exactly. So, TCP in particular, so I know we had touched on this before. So the nature of TCP, and maybe you could sort of shed some light on, what are sort of the three, I guess, factors that are really inhibiting around TCP with the mobile mile?
So one of the bigger issues with TCP is how TCP controls. TCP is very good in that TCP allows you to make sure that you're getting all the bytes and packets of data that are supposed to be coming from one end. It's good to like make sure that you're getting the mail that's coming to you, but it's not necessarily the best way to make sure that that mail is sent in the fastest, most efficient way. And some of the things is like TCP starts with an initial set of parameters that are usually very aggressive. It's like, oh, let's just send a lot of packets at once, and then let's change our approach based on how those packets do. For example, once before I mentioned how TCP might drop its rate in half if it detects a packet. Like when you're opening an app and you're not in the best environment, these sort of adjustments could be heavy-handed. So being able to be cognizant of how that network condition isn't something that TCP takes into account. And there's a lot of ways in which, like if one packet is dropped in a connection, you may have that connection be waiting until that packet is received before continuing. And so the way the controls work to make sure everything is reliable also adds heavy performance implication.
So I think TCP in general, from the way you describe it, it's way too regimented of a protocol. It's intended to ensure reliable connectivity, but it has so many safeguards in place, to validate and authenticate back and forth before we can get a completed transmission in place. That over mobile networks, this is, for lack of a better word, less than ideal.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what about the challenges with software? So I know there's new versions with HTTP that are beginning to roll out. How do you see this being a factor in really sort of impacting how an application can perform on the mobile mile?
Yeah, so TCP is the mechanism by which HTTP, HTTP2, and other higher level software uses to move data from one client to a server waiting to receive that data. So like there's been like performance issues with different protocols that are out there now. For example, HTTP1, devices are resource constrained, and one of the issues is that HTTP1 introduces this issue called head of line blocking, where for each connection, you must wait for that connection to finish retrieving all its resources before another request can reuse that connection. HTTP2 alleviates this problem by having multiple requests for the same resource on the same domain share that connection. So instead of like having to create multiple connections on a device that is resource constrained, you can now share connections. But even HTTP2 has some issues. For example, every single request to a different host must have its own connection. So if you're making a lot of requests to different endpoints, one for images, one for API calls, then you're still making a lot of different connections that you may be waiting for. If HTTP2 detects, for example, a lost packet, which is very common on mobile, it forces everything in that stream to wait until that packet is received. So another issue is that even for newer protocols or for changes to start happening, you need both client and server support. So the client needs to know how to talk in, for example, HTTP2, but the server that you have distributed across the world must also know HTTP2. And in real life scenarios, I feel like we haven't really seen that take place. HTTP2, for example, is only used by probably around less than half the existing requests that are taking place right now.
I think that's in largely part. I mean, a lot of times we see these newer protocols that come forward to help improve performance. a lot of businesses have so much legacy infrastructure that's established for them to have to rework. I mean, every time there's like Speedy, all these new gateways that come with these new protocols, it starts to impact their ability to really be agile and to respond quickly. So with that in mind, when we look at some of these challenges, what do you, so NewMob I know has looked very closely at this, so what was their take on how would they sort of address some of these challenges and sort of improve sort of that last mile experience?
So there are two ways that we focused on improving the last mile. One, let's try and decrease the overhead as much as possible. Let's try and make as few chances for errors as possible. So in that sense, like NewMob keeps a connection alive with multiple. NewMob is able to multiplex multiple domains into the same connection. So now, like, you don't have to make 5 connections for 5 requests at different endpoints. You can make one connection which multiplexes all the requests, and so like there's a lot less overhead in setting that up, which even a setup of a connection might require 5 trips between your client and the edge server.
Sure.
And so another thing we do is we watch very carefully for the network conditions. We use a learning algorithm on our backend to know, hey, we're in this Southeast Asia environment on Wi-Fi and 2G. These conditions are not very good. We should start off with this many packets, this tuning. And so we're able to start off at a much more careful and much more optimal level in terms of how we send things. And so by conserving resources and sending packets in a much more optimized manner than TCP, we're able to reduce customer error rates drastically.
So now, if I read this correctly, so as an alternative to using TCP, so someone would actually install NewMob, but from my understanding, NewMob is actually an SDK that would be installed on an app level on the mobile device or the user's device, and that SDK now would almost, to some sense, anytime data needs to be transmitted from the device back to the origin server across the network, instead of defaulting to TCP, NewMob provides an encoding that now uses sort of a UDP-based protocol. Is that how I read this correctly?
Yeah. So the NewMob SDK, we try and make integration as effortless as possible because as a developer, I hate high-cost integrations. What we do is we hook into all the requests that your application makes. So there's not a lot of work for any developers integrating the SDK to do on their part. And what we do is we take these existing requests that we see that are coming in, and then instead of having the request continue along its normal code path where it would use the device's TCP, HTTP, we use our own protocol and write that request ourselves from the socket level, where we have a lot more control over everything that is happening.
Got it. And in your experience, when customers that you've had deploy NewMob, what sort of improvement did they actually see with it on versus off? Do you know some of those numbers by chance?
Yeah, so it really depends on where you are in the world. For some of our US-based customers, we've seen probably around a 30% improvement in 4G LTE areas.
Okay.
For some of our customers in poorer areas, we've seen anywhere up to like a 300% for some apps in India.
Right.
And the error rates are quite similar. If you're in like San Francisco, your error rates improvements are not as big as if you were on a different network.
Sure.
3G, 2G, very, very different improvements.
And you guys obviously provide, so supported on both Android and iOS platforms, correct?
Yes, and we also support integrations with other platforms like Xamarin, Unity.
Got it. Okay. Great. So, I think when we look at the new mob angle in particular, how they sort of address what we hope will become pretty much a household term is the mobile mile. What happens on unpredictable mobile carrier networks, and how we can really sort of optimize delivery on that last leg. And for Cloudflare, how this sort of positions into the overall CDN infrastructure, I think you'll meet with many CDNs that, us included, where there's things that we do inherently and how we can optimize content. We can cut, we can compress images, because it is on our best interest as a CDN provider to minimize the bandwidth footprint that these packet files are being delivered to mobile networks. Where we're now able to extend even further and really sort of complete the picture is not only does a subscriber to Cloudflare get sort of the full CDN benefits we need for compression, for global caching, but now with NewMob, it's actually serving as almost another point of presence. If you think about what the SDK affords us, is to have that mobile device act as an extension to the Cloudflare network point of presence beyond the base tower, so that content gets delivered locally to that user. There may be myths where more content gets cached on Cloudflare versus having to cache locally on board the device. And at the end of the day, we talk about getting sort of a better mobile experience, which happier customers means they're able to use the app much more than they would have before. And at the end of the day, get increased conversions where your companies are making investments in these mobile applications, and there is obviously something that they want customers to be able to do as far as completing an online transaction, buying something in the app, making purchases, because then again, the apps really become an extension for revenue for the business. So that's pretty much sums up what we wanted to talk to you folks about today is, what CDNs can do today and how they're set up, the nature of what CDNs are, but really to shed some light on sort of this mobile mile concept and how many CDNs, traditional CDNs to date, sort of fall short on what they can do in sort of navigating that last mobile mile. And where NewMob was very unique in the perspective of value of what they brought to the equation, and ultimately what they are going to be doing for Cloudflare. And once we launch this as an integrated product, I'm sure we'll probably have, you can tune into the Cloudflare side, I'm sure we'll have future webinars specifically focused on sort of the mobile SDK disposition. So with that said, I think we will hand it back to you guys. We'll open up for questions and answers.
Great. Thank you very much, Derek and Wesley. Appreciate your presentations. Also you, James, as well. If you do have questions for our speakers, please feel free to type those into the question box on your webcast console. We do have a little bit of time for questions, and we do have some that have already come in, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Let's see, this first question looks like it might be for Derek and Wesley. What fallbacks or safety features are included with the NewMob SDK library?
Okay, I can go talk to that. So we've tried, this has been a big subject ever since we started designing the SDK. So when the SDK detects that something is wrong, perhaps your Wi-Fi is blocking UDP or some content provider is blocking a specific edge server, we'll fall back to vanilla TCP, where it would go, the request would move as if it was never using NewMob at all. And we also have more granular controls for users who like to tune how their trial is going. Maybe they can turn the SDK off and on completely in different countries, change the acceleration rates in different places as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This second question from the audience looks like it may be more for Jim, although Wesley and Derek, you can feel free to chime in as needed. Do low ratings affect my app's ranking in the App Store for searches?
Yes, I would say absolutely. There are a couple of ways of looking at that. One is how your App Store reviews and ratings affect search rankings, and in terms of just findability. And what the latest information is that I've seen on that is that it's not, so the app name, the subtitle, your keywords, all of those things, installations, the volume of installations rather, all of those are still really important in terms of helping your app become findable in the Apple or Google app stores. But then, that's the first step. The second step is converting people who find your app into people who are going to download and use your app. And that's where the ratings really have a strong impact. Screenshots are important, but ratings are really important in terms of the conversion rate. And that's true for both the Apple and the Google app stores. I think it's a little more important or weighed more heavily in the Apple app store, the ratings are, in terms of conversion rates. But bottom line is, it won't necessarily keep people from finding your app, but low ratings and reviews will potentially keep them from downloading your app.
Great. Thank you very much, James. Another attendee is asking, does the new Mob SDK introduce any inherent overhead at the application level that could impact application performance?
Yeah, so we do our best to add as little load as possible to the application load time. So whenever new Mob initializes, if it has to pull a configuration, it loads in an asynchronous manner where your tasks will continue to operate, your splash screen will continue to load while new Mob sets stuff up. New Mob doesn't add, we've tested battery drainage and other factors with and without new Mob, and we have seen no performance deterioration.
Excellent, thank you. Another attendee looks like maybe more for Jim, or maybe not. Can Cloudflare help my website's search engine rankings?
Yeah, I think that's a Cloudflare.
I'm curious though, Jim, do you have any thoughts on that as far as what Cloudflare does for search SEO rankings?
Well, I would just say that I think, again, it goes back to the performance in terms of, I don't think it's necessarily the search rankings, but I think it's the conversion. And you guys can help with the performance, then I think that's going to help with the conversion.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, I think at the end of the day, we've got several customers that use Cloudflare today primarily to be able to cache content and to deliver a faster experience. We have customers that want to be able to, obviously SEO is high in the minds for many businesses today, and they have very targeted solutions for what they do to improve their SEO ranking. That's almost independent of Cloudflare, but there are things within Cloudflare that they can use. Like, for example, we just launched a product today called Cloudflare Workers that it actually allows sort of a JavaScript engine to sit on the edge, and the user can actually use that to sort of detect inbound requests, whether it's coming from a bot or whether it's coming from a legitimate site crawler, and begin to bubble up content, give them access to that cached content a lot faster, which the net effect at the end of the day will actually help improve their SEO ranking. So it's sort of a side effect, but it's not, we're not the direct solution to improve SEO ranking, but there's things that Cloudflare can do to certainly help that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more. You may have touched on this already, but are there any publicly available tools that you can recommend which will help us to identify how our current mobile application performs in different regions of the world?
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of analytic tools out there that will tell you your HTTP requests, error rates, and status codes. Some of them, like I know Criticism is a mobile performance SDK that does this. I also know that New Relic, and I believe like they have these numbers. But having actually like looked at those SDKs myself, I believe that the Cloudflare mobile SDK provides the best view of like how your network requests are going. We have the ability to filter based on network type, cellular type, whether it's on Wi-Fi or AT&T. You can filter based on different locations. By every metric we get from the device, you have control over like how you want to cut and slice your data. And I don't believe that's been possible in the different other SDKs that I have looked at.
So it's almost like a simulator to some extent.
Yeah, so I don't think they've been as focused on fixing the mobile issue as much as telling you
you have a problem.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm afraid that concludes our event for today. I definitely want to thank James, Derek, and Wesley for your presentations, and thank the audience for the questions. Also to Cloudflare, thanks for sponsoring the event from today. Just a quick reminder, this seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so you will get an email when that is ready to review. Until then, we look forward to seeing you at future events, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.